In the new trailer for the Nightreign DLC, there's a shot that lingers on the Night Tree Titan. My brain during this did the annoying thing that it often does, where it looks for patterns to associate with the image, and the one thing I couldn't shake is how similar it looks to Godfrey. Its crown. The branches vaguely looking like hair. I always assumed the jawbone of the Titan was meant to represent that the giants used to have full skulls, but what if it's not? Today we'll be looking at the idea that the jawbones of the Night Tree Titans are actually crowns, and that they might be inspired by real-life mythology. Godfrey is a rather interesting character for what at first appears to be a warrior brute, facing us in battle initially with his companion Serosh metaphorically weighing him down on his shoulder and forcing him to fight us as a man would. Serosh doesn't participate in the battle at first, for if Serosh was to take part means giving in to his bestial nature, which is something that Godfrey cannot do, and also still remain as Godfrey. In Phase 2, Serosh no longer can accept this and decides to step in. There is no way for this to occur and for Godfrey to remain who he is. Thus, Godfrey has accepted that he can no longer rely on fighting as a man and chooses to fight as a beast. In this case, he is no longer Godfrey. He becomes Horalu, warrior, and he fights you with his bare hands in the style reminiscent of a bear, implying that he is descended to the level of a beast, or in his eyes, a true warrior. The central theme here, and one that Bloodborne heavily explores, is the idea that man is a beast and something more simultaneously, but that both are intrinsically linked and an inescapable fact of man's condition. Like a beast putting on a top hat and clothes so as to attempt to begin to distinguish itself from the rest of the animal kingdom. Man is the summation of his culture, and his position in the hierarchy of said culture. Godfrey is the embodiment of the concept of might makes right. This is the law of nature, with none of the illusions and decorations of culture to veil over and conceal this fact. There is no status to squabble over in the animal kingdom, it's simply kill or be killed. Fighting like a bear is a reference to berserkers from Norse mythology, who are said to have drawn their power from the bear, sending them into a state of blind fury, causing them to even gnaw at their own shields. Some depictions of these furious warriors even show them with animal heads, often bear ones. Bear worship was also a prominent aspect of Proto-Germanic culture. To go berserk was to hamask, which translates to change form. In this case, as with the sense, enter a state of wild fury. Some scholars have interpreted those who could transform into a berserker as hamrama, or shape strong, literally translating to being able to shapeshift into a bear's form. This obviously being a metaphor for the transformation of state. This does essentially depict what happened when Godfrey chooses to fight as Horalu. He is now fighting as a berserker instead of someone with responsibilities and a position. Someone that needs to look to the future instead of the current battle. Both war and dance are arts. Arts that focus the mind into such a specific, almost meditative way that at least for a short time makes you unaware that you are even you, or anything at all for that matter. Ask a musician that's really good at improvisation what it feels like, and they will say, nothing at all. This is the true essence of enlightenment. The understanding that the temporality of the self is subjective and illusionary. This is why the dancing lion is such a powerful opponent. It is a dancer and a fighter that makes it a keeper or vessel of divinity. Through entering a trance-like state, the subjective experience of the individual is often described as being in a state where you are unaware of time passing. In this state of flow, as it's often referred to, you have almost become a medium for the expression of the soul of the universe, you being more of a TV antenna as opposed to the TV. This is why the dancing beasts are divine, why dance especially fills the same role as self-induced battle trance similar to berserkers. The divinity of the dancing lion is reflected in the fact that it now has command over earth, water, fire, and air, all the alchemical components of the universe itself. The dancing beast design is fascinating to me. The sculpted keeper being the one operating the mouth of the puppet is an interesting concept and contrast to Godfrey's Phase 2 cutscene, where he accepts that he can no longer be Godfrey in the reality where Sarosh has allowed himself to descend into a battle trance. And then as he decides to take physical form to confront us, says his final goodbye to Sarosh, as Sarosh is no longer able to function as his collar. "Thou didst me good service, Sarosh." Godfrey actually specifically reaches for Sarosh's jawbone just before it cuts to black in what is one of the most metal and insane scenes in all of gaming. The scene is iconic and confusing for many, but it's an ancient mythological and symbolic image which has a history that ties to the concept of strength befitting a crown. So let's go back and explore the possible inspiration for this scene. So firstly we have the legend of Heracles and the Nemean lion. Heracles is a demigod born to a mortal mother and Zeus the Sky Father, and he was born with incredible strength as a result. Heracles over the course of his life undertakes 12 labours given to him by the king Eurystheus, who is the chosen champion of Hera. The first of these tasks is to defeat the Nemean lion, a mythical beast with golden fur which is impenetrable by mortal weaponry. Heracles then proceeds to wrestle and strangle to death the lion with his bare hands, symbolising that the lion could only be defeated by strength of body instead of the use of technology. This characterises the relationship of the lion with man as a symbol of physical prowess, and Heracles took the pelt of the Nemean lion to wear to show this. Alexander the Great himself modelled his own cloak on the same concept. This conquering of the strongest animals in nature represents mastery over it. After slaying the lion, Heracles tried to skin it with a knife from his belt, but failed. He then tried sharpening the knife with a stone, and even tried with the stone itself. Finally, Athena noticed the hero's plight, and told Heracles to use one of the lion's own claws to skin it. When Heracles returned on the 13th day, carrying the carcass of the lion on his shoulders, King Eurystheus was amazed and terrified. Eurystheus forbade him from entering the city, and in the future he was to display the fruits of his labours outside of the city gates. In Heracles' 11th labour, he is tasked with bringing back 3 golden apples from the Garden of Hesperides, and he encounters Antaeus, the son of Poseidon and Gaia, who due to his divine lineage and blessings from his mother, was unable to be defeated while connected with his mother, Gaia being the earth itself. Antaeus would challenge people to wrestling matches which he inevitably won due to his immense strength and invulnerability. When Heracles was wrestling with him, he realised he couldn't win by throwing or pinning him, as was typical of Greek wrestling at the time. Instead, he lifts up Antaeus and crushes him in a bear hug. The hero archetype of Hercules is echoed through multiple cultures in history, them all being a reflection of the first story of them all, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The story of this Assyrian king is considered the very first story written down. Gilgamesh was a tyrant king. He was 2/3 god, 1/3 man, who the people despised. And their prayers were answered. In response, Enlil creates Enkidu as Gilgamesh's equal. Enkidu was the first recorded depiction of the archetype of the wild man. He roamed the forest and lived with animals and drank water from the rivers, until one day Enkidu was seduced by a woman and taken to the town to be taught how to be civilized. After making love to the woman sent to tame him, he is described as weakened, and his beastly brethren now run from him, as they do any other man. As a result, he grew disillusioned and lonely. Enkidu, now civilized, is told about Gilgamesh and his ways. Enraged, he seeks him out to put a stop to this. Upon their meeting, they have a wrestling match which shook the mountains and the earth itself. Enkidu acknowledges Gilgamesh as his superior, and they become friends. Gilgamesh proposes that they should journey into the forest to slay the demonic god Humbaba, which Enkidu reluctantly agrees to after warning him. The relationship between Enkidu and Gilgamesh seems to be essentially akin to that of Godfrey and Sarosh. Enkidu being more Sarosh and Godfrey more Gilgamesh, but some of the themes are explored in both characters, having been seduced into a life of civility, thematically representing the transition from a nomadic human lifestyle to one where through agriculture we could now have long-term settlements. Their relationship with each other humanizes Gilgamesh and civilizes Enkidu. This is a theme present throughout all of FromSoft, and it being the main theme of Bloodborne, but the one I want to reference specifically is Gael because he's almost an inversion of this concept. Gael begins the fight with you on all fours and roars at you like a beast, his strikes wild and frenzied. When Gael goes into phase 2, he becomes hollow, which is confirmed by the fact that the Hollow Slayer Greatsword now works on him. But paradoxically, he becomes more human in this phase, now fighting on 2 feet and using his repeating crossbow. His swordsmanship is now more direct and focused, and he utilizes his cape as an additional limb. Why does Gael become more human as he becomes hollow? Well, Gael was already insane from his millennia of searching for the Dark Soul. He realizes that he has finally become a vessel for it after the dried blood of the pygmies becomes wet again, and he realizes the player will fulfill his purpose and take the blood to the painter. So he finally lets go, and a memory of him in his prime emerges. Like suddenly you were fighting Artorias before he fell to the abyss and became a maddened beast himself. Uriah of Londor believes to become hollow is to hold the true face of humanity. Our lord and liege, I prithee, play the usurper. When the moment cometh to link the fire, wrestle it from its mantle. The age of fire was founded by the old gods, sustained by the linking of the fire. But the old gods are no more, and the all-powerful fire deserveth a new heir. Our Lord of Hollows, it shall be, who weareth the true face of mankind. Now the final 2 references we need to add to this picture are both from the Bible, and the first is Cain and Abel, the first children of Adam and Eve. Many of you will know this story, but for those that don't, God requested a sacrifice from Cain and Abel to show their faith. Abel was a shepherd and Cain a farmer. Abel offered his biggest and healthiest sheep, which pleased the Lord. Cain offered what he could, but his sacrifice was meager, and God had no regard for his offering. Cain, filled with jealousy for his brother, led him to his field where he struck down Abel in what was the first murder. Going back to Sumerian mythology, many scholars believe that this story is a reflection of the themes of the story of Enlil and Enki, 2 godly brothers who embody contrasting aspects of divinity. Enlil is the strict and authoritative god associated with order and storms, while Enki is a god associated with wisdom and water, his realm that of magic and saving humanity. This is mostly a thematic reflection of a sibling rivalry narrative, but as you can already see, we have a lot of the symbolism from Elden Ring appearing here. Order versus wisdom and intelligence, reflecting the theme of the Golden Order's battle with Liurnia. So we can see a thoroughfare from Sumerian mythology to Greek mythology to Semitic mythology for the archetype of the hero, starting with Gilgamesh, then Heracles for the Greeks and Hercules for the Romans. Then, the next story we move on to from the Bible ties all of them together, and this is the man named Samson and his relationship with a certain woman, one named Delilah. Samson was born during a conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines, a group of people descendant from the Greeks. This was a time of great conflict for the tribes of Israel. Samson's mother was barren and couldn't conceive, but the angel of God appeared before her and her husband, proclaiming that she would conceive a child that would begin to deliver the Philistines from the Israelites, as long as the mother and the child took a Nazirite vow, which involves the following: abstain from wine and strong drink, as well as other grape products such as vinegar, refrain from cutting the hair on the head, not to become ritually impure by contact with corpses or graves, even those of family members. When he's a young man, Samson leaves the hills of his people to see the cities of Philistia. He falls in love with a woman from Timnah, whom he decides to marry, ignoring the objections of his parents over the fact that she's not an Israelite. Samson is repeatedly seized by the Spirit of the Lord, who blesses him with immense strength. The first time this is displayed is when Samson, on the way back to ask for the Philistine woman's hand in marriage, is attacked by a lion that he simply grabs and rips apart. Samson, however, keeps this a secret and doesn't mention the miracle to his parents. He arrives back at the Philistine's house and becomes betrothed to his wife. He then returns home and comes back to Timnah sometime later for the wedding. On his way, Samson sees that bees have nested in the carcass of the lion and made honey. He eats a handful of honey and gives some to his parents. At the wedding feast, Samson tells a riddle to 30 groomsmen, all Philistines, and if they can solve it, he will give them 30 pieces of fine linen garments. But if they cannot, they must give him 30 pieces of fine linen and garments. The riddle is a veiled account of the 2 encounters with the lion, at which only he was present. Out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. The Philistines are infuriated by the riddle, and they tell Samson's new wife that they will burn her and her husband's household if she did not discover the answer to the riddle and tell them. At the urgent and tearful imploring of his bride, Samson gives her the solution and she passes it on to them. Samson then replies in one of the most brutal descriptions of a man describing his wife possible. "If you had not ploughed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." In a rage, Samson returns to his father's house. Instead, the family of the bride gave her to one of the groomsmen. Sometime later, Samson returns to Timnah to visit his wife, unaware that she's now married to one of the former groomsmen, but her father refuses to allow Samson to see her, offering to give Samson a younger sister instead. He proceeds to go to the wilderness and gathers 300 foxes, ties them together in pairs by their tails and attaches a burning torch to each pair of foxes, and then turns them loose into the grain fields. The Philistines, upon learning why Samson burned their crops, decided to burn Samson's wife and father-in-law to death in retribution. In revenge, Samson slaughters many Philistines, saying, "I have done to them what they did to me." Samson takes refuge in a cage, and an army of Philistines go to the tribe of Judah and demand that 3,000 men of Judah deliver them Samson. With Samson's consent, they tie him down and are about to hand him over to the Philistines, when he uses his immense strength to break free of the ropes and basically goes on a complete rampage, in a scene that would likely make Corn blush. Using only the jawbone of an ass, he massacres 1,000 Philistines. Shortly after this, Samson travels to Gaza, where he meets a certain woman, a prostitute named Delilah, and decides that he likes her company. His enemies wait at the gate of the city to ambush him, but he tears down the gate off its hinges and just kind of flexes on them. Samson, once more, blinded by lust, had fallen in love with Delilah, and as such the Philistines approached her with a certain request. Figure out what the source of Samson's strength is. Samson refuses to reveal his secret first and teases her, telling her that he will lose his strength if he's bound up by fresh bowstrings. She does this while he sleeps, but when he wakes up he snaps the strings. She persists, and he tells her that he can be bound with new ropes. She ties him up with new ropes while he sleeps, and he snaps those too. She asks again, and he says he can be bound if his locks are woven into a weaver's loom. She then weaves him into a loom, but he simply destroys the loom and carries it off with him. Delilah persists, and Samson finally capitulates and tells Delilah that God supplies his power because of his consecration to God as a Nazirite, symbolized by the fact that a razor has never touched his head, and that if his hair was cut off, the vow would be broken and he would lose his strength. Delilah then woos him to sleep and has a servant cut his hair. Samson loses his strength and he's captured by the Philistines who blind him by gouging out his eyes. Samson's eyes were put out because he had followed them too often, as a reference to him being led astray by his lust. They then take him to Gaza to imprison him, to put him to work on a large millstone and grinding grain. One day, the Philistine leaders assemble in a temple for a religious sacrifice. They summon Samson so that the people can watch him perform for them. The temple is so crowded that people are climbing onto the roof to watch, and as the rulers of the entire government of Philistia have gathered, some 3,000 people in total, Samson is led into the temple if he can lean against the supporting pillars to rest. However, while in prison, his hair had begun to grow back, and he asks God for strength. God gives him strength, and he breaks the pillars, causing the temple to collapse, killing himself and the people inside. The story is rather fascinating from the perspective of Godfrey and Marika. We have all the elements of a seduction and betrayal right there. As many have already pointed out, the phrase likely refers at least in part to the relationship between Godfrey and Marika. Interestingly, we seem to have an inversion of this, partially in that Godfrey's strength is bestowed upon him by Marika, but when he reverts to Horalu, he fights with his own strength. So the part of the seductress is actually sort of directed at God for offering strength to Samson in the first place. The whole concept of hair or a vow representing divine strength is quite loaded if we examine Godfrey's helmet. When you remove his helmet from his model with the smith box tool, you get an interesting depiction of him bald. Take this with a grain of salt. This sort of gives credence to the symbolism of his hair being a part of the crown, which he so eloquently informs us he has earned through strength. I find it very amusing that if you go to the comments section of the Elden Lord crown on Fextra Life, that it's people complaining that they can't remove the hair, when FromSoft has likely left us in intentionally for lore reasons. This concept is elaborated on in the Talisman of Lord's Bestowal, the name itself implying that the imbibing of sap is what makes Godfrey a lord, where it's more of a personal strength that makes Hoarolu a lord. A talisman depicting Godfrey, Burst Elden Lord, receiving the precious sap, increases poise after using the Flask of Tears. The Lord accepted the sap stoically, without any sign of wavering. No wonder Lord of the Erd Tree casts a long shadow over the lands. Without any sign of wavering here is likely a reference to him metaphorically killing Hoarolu to become Godfrey, and how Hiserosh makes him a stoic figure like Gilgamesh instead of a wild man like Enki. More recent Christian commentators have viewed Samson as a type of Jesus Christ based on similarities between his story and Jesus's. Samson and Jesus' birth were both foretold by angels, who predicted that they would save their people. Samson was born to a barren woman, and Jesus was born to a virgin. Samson defeated a lion and Jesus Satan, whom the first epistle Peter describes as the roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Samson's betrayal by Delilah has also been compared to Jesus' betrayal by Judah. Both Delilah and Judas were paid in pieces of silver for their respective deeds. Ibenza Cobham Brewer notes that in his guide to a scripture history, the Old Testament that Samson was blinded, insulted, and enslaved prior to his death, and that Jesus was blindfolded, insulted, and treated as a slave prior to his crucifixion. Brewer also compares Samson's death among the wicked with Christ being crucified between two thieves. This concept is likely why we see Godfrey depicted in his death scene during the opening cinematic in the pose of a crucifixion, purposely tying him to Marika and Samson. We also see this theme of blindness being reflected in taking away Godfrey and the Tarnished's guidance and grace. The reason we looked into Cain and Abel before Samson is because an interesting phenomenon occurs in art that depicts the first murder of Cain attacking Abel. The Bible makes no mention specifically of how the murder was performed, but as early as the 7th century, the scene is depicted with Cain cracking open Abel's head with the jawbone of an ass. The jawbone is actually one of the earlier and more commonly used prehistoric weapons, and is surprisingly effective as an axe or a club. The story of Cain and Abel is often thought to be representative of one that attempts to portray the tension between the end of nomadic human culture and the rise of agricultural practices leading to settlements becoming larger and more self-sufficient. This tension between what was a violent and brutal lifestyle to one where culture had the opportunity to flourish as humans now had more time to focus on artistic pursuits, and thus the birth of mythology and stories as we know it takes place. And so does the conception of the hero and his journey to better himself. So with all this in mind, let us take a look at the Night Titan and his jawbone once more. In this context, I believe that the jawbone is actually a crown, and that it's representative of the strength which allowed the ancient Titans to be considered old gods. This is rather similar to the narrative in Greek mythology and the conception of the Titamangi, which is the war between Zeus and the Titans. The reason the crown is a jawbone is because it's the original symbol of strength for prehistoric man, the symbol of the first murder and gaining strength through death. We see all of these themes culminate in the story of Godfrey, who is an amalgamation of all the hero types we discussed. The Night Titan represents the first conception of this idea in Elden Ring. The crown could commemorate the first murder, and perhaps the corpse we fight the Night Lord on is the dead brother of the Night Titan that he betrayed due to him being more favoured by God, perhaps because his sacrifice was more acceptable. I don't believe this is exactly what happened, but there is some narrative here of prehistoric violence, which I believe may be a reference to the concept of the first sin as well, in the sense that the first murder is the source of suffering. Perhaps like Godfrey, the Titan ripped off the jaw of its vassal beast to wear as a crown to signify its strength and right to call itself a lord. Basically, in summary, the jawbone is a crown and not part of the physiology of the Night Titan itself, and that Godfrey rips off Serosh's jawbone specifically as a reference to mythological characters that inspired the archetype of strength that he is, and why that strength befits a crown. This symbol being a synthesis of the idea of how we gain runes through death, and that there is a taking of divinity through murder, and that this represents the metaphysical concept of strength.